So my number three is this movie called To Be or Not to Be from 1942, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, starring Carol Lombard, Jack Benny, Robert Stack. And the quick IMDb logline on this is: during the Nazi occupation of Poland, an acting troupe becomes embroiled in a Polish soldier's efforts to track down a German spy. Um, the logline actually doesn't sound humorous at all. And I'll maybe speak a little bit about how I even came to this movie. I had watched other movies that Lubitsch had done, Heaven Can Wait, Shop Around the Corner, and such in the last like 10 years. And then I knew this was a movie that was, well revered and talked about, but I came to it pretty late in life, and it kind of blew me away. Uh, I'm actually not a big satire or gimmick person. Like I said, I find those movies interesting, but not funny. This movie is a farce. But I think why this is on the list for me is because I think it really highlights the power of laughter in bad times, and that bad times can also be funny. It's how life is. I have so many moments of, in sickness or what have you, sitting outside, I don't know, an operation ward at the hospital when a family member is in there and you're sitting outside with another family member, and through the tears and the tiredness, somebody does something stupid, like, I don't know, say something funny or farts or whatever, and you just crack up. That is the power of laughter, that it can sort of seep itself anywhere. And I think this movie does a great job of doing that. Um, and I think the key to it is that the farce is rooted in reality. I don't think anybody else but Lubitsch, who's famous for his light touch, can actually make this movie work, at least for me. Otherwise, this will become very heavy-handed, or maybe too preachy, or maybe too sappy, or maybe too whatever. But it's sort of this delicate dance between, on one hand, you're feeling bad about all the stuff that's happening, but then you're also laughing the other moment. And I think the key to that is the bad people are also part of the buffoonery. They are also silly and kind of human in their own way. And it's not to sort of make them endearing, like it's very clear who's in the wrong, but there's sort of this light touch and sort of tightrope walk that he does with all these characters. So I don't know, I just find that more than laugh out loud funny, but just charming and just so clever and fun. I think the cast is a big part of this. Carol Lombard is just incredible. I haven't seen that many movies of her, maybe a few. I clearly need to kind of do a full binge on her, but she's electric. Brilliant comedic timing. And again, with a lot of these movies that I have on my list, you'll notice that it is about the individual people who are funny, but to me, it's more about ensemble pieces and how people are reacting and being funny with each other. So, you have these two distinct worlds of the Jews and the Nazis. They are buffoons in their own ways. You bring them together. What happens when they are brought together in this weird farce of there being a lookalike to Hitler, and there being this sort of drama company behind it? So again, a brilliant kind of storytelling device. You could say that this is Hollywood kind of, patting themselves on the back around, art is important or what have you. But I actually do believe in that. And maybe that's why this movie works on me, that art is important and it matters even in the bad times. And at times it can save us from the worst of things. So there's a little bit of that message if you want to take it. But if not, you can just have a good time in a bad time, which is, I think, amazing about this movie. It's been on my repeat watch list. I've seen it several times. So yeah, that's my number three, To Be or Not to Be.
Yeah, so I had never seen this movie or actually heard of this movie before that you put on this list. And I was very pleasantly surprised. You said laugh out loud at some point in what you were saying. And I literally, the first 20 minutes of this movie are hilarious. Like I was literally laughing out loud. So many of those gags in the beginning. I mean, Hitler jokes are always funny.
Yes.
That line when they're doing like the Zig Heil, and it's this joke of like just repeating how goofy that whole Nazi salute is, and then the Hitler, so like Zig Heil, hail Hitler, and the Hitler's guy's like, hail myself. I'm like that. I literally laughed for like 5 minutes at that. But then when I looked and like, wow, this movie was made like during World War II. Like Hitler was still alive.
Yep.
They're actually poking fun at the Nazis, which must have been very ballsy and very hard as an audience member at the time to even see that. It's like, oh, people over there, right, in the war that are getting killed by what Hitler's army is doing, and yet you still are able to laugh at him and the goofiness of Hitler. It kind of reminded me a lot of the Looney Tunes cartoons at the time too. Were doing a lot of the mocking of Hitler and the enemies of the United States, and that just immediately like pulled me in. I thought the dialogue was really sharp, which is something that I also like, a lot of dialogue driven humor. It reminded me a lot too of a sitcom as well, like the mix up with the there's like a plot thread of the Nazi spy, and then there's also this love triangle comedy bit with the wife and the husband, and this other guy who's trying to court the wife. It felt a lot like I was watching some of I Love Lucy or something in a good way. I was like, wow, maybe that's where this comes from. The whole thing also reminded me a lot of like Mel Brooks too, which then I went to find that he remade this movie, or he was in a remake of it in the 80s. I'm like, oh, now I kind of get where a lot of his comedic sensibilities came from. So yeah, I mean, I felt the film, the beginning of it was a lot funnier than when it turned into more like a conventional spy kind of espionage thriller. But yeah, overall, I would recommend this movie. I mean, I found it, again, I laughed out loud. And I love that too, when you can find movies from the old time, like this is made in 42, right? And that it's still that funny, which is something I love about humor as well. Like it's something that doesn't always date itself. Like something that might have been funny 100 years ago can still be funny now if it's done in the right way by real comedic artists. And this movie really helped remind me of that. Of like, yeah, like it's not any time you can make a funny movie. So I thought this was great. I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. Yeah. I mean, I would say as the movie goes on, even then the buffoonery continues. Like that whole scene when you're worried that the guy who's pretending might get found out with the fake mustache.
Oh yeah. The fake Hitler.
That whole sequence is just so incredible and so clever. But then again, sort of going back to the light touch. On one hand, you are biting your nails, is going to get caught. Then the other hand, you're like, oh my gosh, Crisis averted, this is great. And then of course they make the wrong move because the guys show up there to save him, and we're sort of back to square one.
Yeah.
So the high stakes in that 10-minute time period is just so amazing and done in such a funny way. Yeah, I forgot to mention about the fact that this was made and screened when the actual war was on.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine like the optics of that, the impact that must have had on people. And it's truly kind of going back to my point of laughter being this drug in the bad times. This movie is literally that, because it was made in that time.
Yeah.
And it continues to kind of, give more and more. You can, swap the bad times from Nazi times to whatever times you want. But it makes this movie a little bit more weighty because it was made when this was happening.
Yeah, which I think speaks to the power of comedy too, that you can kind of do that kind of thing and maybe say some things because you're using comedy when at a time when Hitler was still a major, evil in the world who was wreaking all this havoc. And yet here this movie comes out where, again, there's Hitler jokes in the first 5 minutes. And I was like, this is hilarious. And then when I looked it up, I was like, wow, literally during the war. And that is something that is so, I don't want to say it's easier to make Nazi jokes now, but you can make fun of Hitler and it doesn't pack the same weight because he's dead. And it's been, decades. So it just shows how bold this movie must have landed. I mean, it's very funny. Definitely recommend it.
And again, sort of very light. I think that's sort of the brilliance of this movie could have in anyone else's hands would just come off as, I don't know, something else. And we'll probably get to in our honorable mentions, other movies and other filmmakers who have done satires or whatever and can push it a little bit too much in one direction, at least for me.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.